time for another round of Brandy. Candid conversations over cocktails about all things brand. With your hosts, Reilly, Newman, and Scott Saunders, the brand developers behind Motif Brands.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Brandy. Scott and I decided that for today's topic, we're going to cover rebranding. We both feel that out in the market, there's a ton of confusion about rebranding and whether a business should do it or they shouldn't. So today we're going to cover the if, whens, whys, and shoulds of rebranding.
Yeah. And I mean, really, our prospective clients come in the door in one of two scenarios. They have a brand, and they seriously needs help with the brand, and a rebrand is in order, or they're building one from the ground up, something from nothing. And rebrand is, I mean, it's wherever we look, it's always happening, right? Everything, people are, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, even sports teams. The first one that comes to mind most recently is the Los Angeles Clippers, who recently rebranded. And I'll be honest with you, I think it was a huge mistake. The brand on itself, the logo, the visual identity is clean, it's crisp, it's professional, it's well executed, but it also, to me, pulls out the athleticism, the sport from it, and it feels more like a cruise ship. For the LA Clippers, what the Clippers is a sail ship, and I get that, but it feels like you could put that on a brand that manufactures high-end yachts, and that would be the new LA Clippers logo. And it's something that they're trying to do too many things. There's literally a compass, a sea, the sail ship,
the basketball,
the grooves of the basketball in the towards the hull. It's just trying to do too much, and I feel like it was a mistake. And there's other times too, I think, when companies thought that rebranding was the answer. Yeah. And I think that's where it comes that, rebranding is great. That's our backbone of our business, but doesn't mean that that's the knee-jerk reaction that you should is to rebrand if your business is struggling, I think, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different dynamics where businesses, they'll get confused where there's rebrands and there's refreshes, and it's just a term that's thrown around a lot when they're not actually considering what is the point of a rebrand. In my mind, a rebrand should be to position, to refine, and to refocus the company or the business to really go back to, okay, what are we doing here? What is this business for? And that's taking into consideration how the market shift, how the business may have grown and changed over time, or simply how their customer may have changed. And like you said with the Clippers, it could be just them doing this wasn't actually asking their audience, their fans, what they're wanting. Yeah. Do they want something that looks like a yacht club on their merchandise? Like, do they want to wear a hat that has that, or do they want something that's more sports?
All the fans are dressed like they're out of Captain Gilligan's Island. I think of the skipper.
But I think that's and that's, to me, it's like whenever there is a rebrand being considered, it's okay, why? And it's not just the new shiny object to get a new logo, to do these things, and it makes someone feel like they're doing something, but it needs to go back to the strategy and refocusing. And like the Clippers, for example, or there's a lot of examples throughout history where that was neglected.
Yeah. And there's times when even a minor refresh is in order. I recently saw one where Pez, the company Pez, just the other day, it came up on brand under consideration. If you look side by side, you can barely notice it, but they've thickened up the line work. They've modified the PEZ made out of stacked Pez, but it's just in the rendering, and it's an improvement. It's subtle enough that no one is probably ever going to notice. Yep. Even just now, I Culligan, the water softener company, they just rebranded. I've got invoices with an old logo, and I've got the new. I go to pay online, and there's the new logo, and it's okay. It just feels very kind of what everyone else is doing, the script, and it lost some of its iconic feel. So I'm not sure. I mean, that's another thing to gauge is whether it was successful. But again, here's an instance where it wasn't being rolled out at the same time. So I'm noticing a difference on certain things, and I think that's the bigger question too. I think there's maybe twofold of a question. If a business is thinking about rebranding, is what is it you're trying to fix with the rebrand, and is that the right diagnosis? Is a visual rebrand, or it could even be a namature, right? It could be changing the name a little bit. So there's that avenue of needing to take care of that.
I think it goes back to the refocusing. It's changing the scope and going, okay, what are we doing here? Why should we be throwing out everything and rolling out new identity materials, new logo, new scripts, new everything, and really, is it part of the strategy? Because all those things they're tactical and part of the moves you make as a business, but really, they need to move you forward. They're not just check boxes to tick off.
And if the answer is yes, that the right solution is to rebrand, do a visual rebrand, I think a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, and understandably so, because their capital is very limited. They're for investing back into the business, but the investment costs. The cost alone of rebranding, and because in my opinion, and I think I speak for both of us, to rebrand successfully, you have to be consistent across the board, and it has to be simultaneous. I know there's some where they'll be like, okay, well, I'll redo these, but I still have 1,000 brochures, and I can't just waste that. And so, but I'll rebrand. I'll add we'll put the new logo on the brochure 6 months down the road, right? And that to me is when you have. That's the time. To me. If it comes down to dollars and cents, then you're not ready to rebrand. If you do need to rebrand, because we've seen time and time again where a launch that is slow over a period of time can create market confusion, lack of brand clarity, and we just spoke about brand clarity in the last episode, being unclear in your brand because there's multiple variations of your brand out there, the new and the old, coexisting. And yes, there's a degree by which you want to let your audience know that you're rebranding, right? You want to kind of follow a paper thread or something that lets them know that we're new and in a sense of improved, right? There's something fresh about us. But you've got to be prepared to, like, literally overnight, plan that launch and have that launch window be short so that it just maximizes the impact of that rebrand.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I think it is an opportunity to either campaign around or go back to the reason behind the rebrand and use that as a campaign of going, hey, we're doing this, we're rebranding because of X, Y, and Z. And that's going to add, again, going back to clarity, it's for the business on the purpose of rebranding and investing in it, but also for the customer, for them to be on the same page as the business, go, oh, yeah, this is like, what was that shaving... the Shaving Club rebrand. Dollar Shave Club.
Dollar Shave Club. For years, I mean, going back to, I think, when they first launched, and I think it was back in 2012, or before that, 2010, I started using Dollar Shave brand, and I loved their brand. I loved the personality. I loved the messaging.
It was good.
The nuances, everything they did to make it unique. I was so on board with the brand, felt like it got me, and they were funny. It wasn't too serious, and I loved that about them.
Yep. And
then they got bought up, and the corporation, I forget exactly bought them up, but one of the big Unilever bought them up, and they literally rolled out with the most generic. They went to an initials DSC, and the packaging looked like on par with everything else on the shelf. It got more corporate. They started pulling away some of the better products. The experience went downhill. It was a shame. And that was where I felt like they just went in and tried to change a bunch of things that shouldn't have been changed. They didn't. I don't know if they just were really in touch with their audience, and I have a feeling they weren't. I feel like it would start off as a small business that grew in popularity, and then to the point that, rightfully so, the owners are able to sell off to a bigger corporation. The bigger corporation doesn't, to them, it's just a matter of retool it like they do all their other things, and they'll continue to make money. Yeah. And now Dollar Shave Club, you can find them in Target. You can find them right alongside Harry's and some of the other brands are doing the same things. Yeah. Before, Dollar Shave Club was an online-only subscription. You couldn't find it anywhere, and that was one of the joys. Trust me, as soon as I saw that, okay, well, I still have the head. Maybe if I need some blades and everything, I'll pick them up at Target. But there's no need for me to do the subscription model anymore with Dollar Shave. And it just, it was another instance that came to mind that it was they lost someone. I ended up switching brands, and it was a shame.
Yeah, and I feel like even the clarity how you described the previous brand that they used to have, you mentioned its personality, its sense of humor, the styling, everything like that. And with the new one, you pretty much use no adjectives because that's what it looks like. It looks like you can't describe it. It looks so bland and soulless.
It was a corporation speaking to me as a consumer, not a smaller brand. And I don't know if I know big brands can do this, but for me, it seems like as a consumer and to me, the small brands are the ones that take more risks, and they're willing to. It's the ones that are starting to get out there. They decide to just do something different. Whether it's I think of like Sasquatch hand soaps. I know they've been around, but they haven't been around that long in terms of brand and shelf presence and how they've grown. And obviously their model and everything's going to change over time as they grow, as they should.
That's
but
Dr. Sasquatch?
Yeah.
The soap and stuff.
Yeah, Dr. Sasquatch. It's like those types of brands that just, I try not to take myself too seriously or life too seriously. And so I relate to brands that don't take themselves too seriously. So I've always gravitated towards brands that just, are playful. They have a sense of humor and I feel like they get me more. And now that may not be for everybody, right? Because not everybody is. Maybe that's not how that there are certain things they take more seriously in life than someone like myself.
Shaving.
And that's okay.
Shaving is a very serious.
Shaving is a very serious. No, but
But I feel like the new brand of Dollar Shave Club has less soul than like Gillette now. I feel like Gillette has more personality.
It's funny you just used the word. We do branding all the time. We talk about humanized qualities when you talk about a brand regarding like it's got a personality or like we talk about voice, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Voice and messaging. So messaging is what you say. For us, brand voice is how you say it, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like I can. Speak very fast and in a high tenor voice, or I can speak very low and with a low tremble and slower, and it gives a different tone, than something when I'm talking about really high and those are voices. And so a brand has a voice in how it talks visually and literally to its audience. But you mentioned soul, and it's funny because I don't know why. Personally, for me as a brandist guy, I've never used that word before.
Soul.
But
it's deeper than personality.
It all of a sudden brings context to it because when I start thinking of it as a brand has a soul, it has, and that because it encompasses so much stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It encompasses what it says, how it says it, the tone it takes, right? Is it serious? It's passion. It's what it's passionate about, what it stands for, right? And those are all the emotional connectors that brands connect with their audience. And so even when we're talking on, swing back to the topic of rebranding can be just simply changing your brand's voice, changing your brand's messaging. It doesn't necessarily mean design a new logo.
Yeah.
And I know we'll touch on this in later episodes, but a logo and brand are different.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so a lot of times when people think, oh, I need to rebrand, that means I need to redesign my logo.
Yeah.
Because business is slow, or maybe the competitor is dominating the market, so I need to change my logo. And that's, again, where we see so many smaller businesses, coming to us going, hey, I need to change this. And which is why, we tend to, a lot of times, people approach us and go, hey, I need to redesign my brochure.
Yeah.
Right? And the first question we ask them is, okay, why do you need to do that?
What's the problem?
In other words, we start asking higher elevation questions to, like a doctor would, right? Mm-hmm. You know, if you come in going, I've got this pain in the right side of my chest. Well, they're going to start asking bigger, they're going to take a step back up, and they're going to start asking bigger health questions.
There's
right?
Most likely a deeper
right,
rooted
because
issue.
it's a symptom and a sign of something. So if your business is sliding, if your sales are dropping, if you haven't increased sales or customers or anything like that for a couple of years, you're left scratching your head, and the first thing you think is, I need to redesign. I need to redesign my logo or redesign my package design to have it be fresh, and then it'll seem like something new, and then people will want to buy me.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. There's so many factors that go into that, and so, you know, on the topic of rebranding, it's always to rebrand or not to rebrand. That's the question. Yeah. Right.
Yep. I think that's going back to, again, refocusing, where it's, okay, your brochure could be faulty and not look great, but that doesn't mean that you just rebrand it or you redesign it or you relay it out. That's not going to save it, because ultimately you need to refocus, because the brochure might not even be the right vehicle for your message.
And should you be having a brochure? That's an even bigger question. In other words, are you properly reaching your audience with the way that, you know, it pains me to see in the day and age that we live in where there's still businesses that are doing business if it's 1989. You know,
unless that's part of their brand.
They still have fax numbers. They still work. You know, like the things of like a fax, and even and even I had a conversation the other day with someone, and we were talking about, like, you know, information on website or on business cards and things. How everyone feels like they have to put their website on a business card or on the side of their vehicle. And we live in a day and age now, if I know what the name of the brand or the company is, I will find them, because that is what I'm typing into Google, and that is where that's how I'm going to get to their
look it up.
website. I don't need I don't need the www dot blah 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 blah, because even then I'm not going to remember that. I'm not going to care.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to ask Siri, pull up the website for brand X. Yeah. And that's where I'll get it, because that's the day and age we live in. And, you know, clients in business are always catering to the slowest denominator in the deck of their audience, you know. We've talked before about, you know, brand intelligence even, you know, and how if you're talking to the dumbest person in the room, all the intelligent audience is going to leave. Yeah. And if you're wanting to just have an intelligent audience, then you need to be okay with letting the ones that don't understand you or don't understand it to leave the room. Yeah. That's okay, because in the end, you're going to be building a more intelligent brand and speaking the level of language that you need to be for the type of customer you want, maybe not have at the moment. And again, that's the other thing, is like with anything with brand and rebranding, even if it is time to rebrand, and always going back to the base question of who are you trying to reach, who are you trying to communicate to? Yeah.
And I feel like that's a good reason to rebrand, is to go, okay, who have we been serving, and who's not either profitable as a customer or actually appreciating us to our full value, and then pruning that customer base or that clientele from, because they're burdening not only your business, but probably costing you the most out of all your customers, but also burdening the rest of your customers, because now you're having to serve them and take time aside to deal with them, while your other customers are wanting more of what you do best, and they appreciate that, and they want to pay you more for that. So it's like being able to kind of, again, refocus and go, okay, what is that? If it is the 20% who's, you know, 80% proving the most love for your business, then it's like, how do we better serve them? And that's what the rebrand should be. It should be a pruning process of refocusing, refining, and improving everything for those ideal audience, not just slapping a new logo on it.
Yeah. The lens that you should always be looking at your brand with is how do you hone your brand to speak to the customer that you want, not the customer you have. Now, maybe that's the same thing, but most likely it's not. If you are introducing a product and you're building traction, but you're looking for more of a higher end consumer that's got more of a luxury, higher income level and everything, but the current customers are more median income, if all your advertising, if all your, not just advertising, all of your touch points, if everything you're doing to try to grow your business is speaking to your current customer, you're never going to get the customer you want.
Yeah.
And rebrand, the point of a rebrand is to help to redirect that ship that's out at sail, right?
Yeah.
You're pointing out on a new horizon, a different direction, and that may mean change everything. It may mean change nothing, but one little thing.
Yeah.
There's so many layers to rebranding, and obviously there's the visual, but there's so many other touch points of brand that can be rehoned and in a sense rebranded. But there's also nothing wrong with refreshing. To me, that's like a facelift. That's a nip and tuck. Right, that's
Yeah,
like what Pez did, where they didn't rebrand; they just did a
barely noticeable.
Yeah, it was a slight. It's almost like when you start to slowly improvise change in your brand. If it's minor enough, that can be done over time. That can be done on a shoestring budget, because you're slowly, as things run the eye, you're introducing the new brand, and you're honing and making things a little bit better.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that if you make one minor, the font choice is slightly thinner than it used to be. So subtle that you'd have to look at a side by side to notice it. That's just something you can roll that out over 2 or 3 years. It's not going to matter.
Yeah,
right.
definitely.
Because you're slowly making those benefits and those tweaks over time.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a refresh versus a rebrand. To me, would be that a refresh doesn't have a repositioning. A rebrand would be, okay, you're deliberately choosing certain things to subtract and maybe add a few different things to your position as a business or who you serve, and it's much more complicated and strategic. Versus a refresh, you could update something overnight and run it in the morning and it's fine.
Yeah,
and I think that's where with a rebrand, being able to roll out things as timely as possible so that it looks right and the engagement with it is in the best way possible. And that's even like you look at Honda, they're doing like a big rebrand right now, but it's all within the strategy of them going more EV and electric based and their whole new design language with these new models they're rolling out. But it's a huge, huge shift from their previous Honda brand and what everyone is familiar with, but you have tons of Hondas out on the road. So how do you don't just throw those away? But it's like being able to go, okay, this is the transition. If you look at how they've strategically, they've given reason as to why this new Honda logo, it's updated, the new type of the word mark, everything about it, how it's placed on the vehicle, the new design language of the models. But they've given reason to why they're rolling it out and kind of given a timeline of how they're rolling it out and when to expect it completely out by with the new EV models.
Yeah.
So it's been obviously really well thought out, and that to me is like that's rebrand, where there's a reason and it's thought out and it's deliberate.
It's intentional on all points. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is that when a lot of times it becomes a follow the leader. The competition's getting a leg up, so people feel like we need to follow suit. The classic example we touched on a while back was the Coke Pepsi dilemma of the 80s, where Coke literally changed their product. They rebranded the very thing, not their logo, but the very thing they were delivering to market in response to. And I know this is before your time, you little youngster, but I lived through this in the 80s where the Pepsi generation, it was like this new ad campaign, and it was like all young people and hip people, anybody that's like just wanting to live life with the gusto. Was like they were defined as the Pepsi generation. And Pepsi did the Pepsi Challenge, where they were giving blind taste tests, and everyone was preferring the taste of Pepsi over Coke. And Coke got scared. And they reacted by reformulating Coke. And they introduced in the market new Coke. And I think it was 1985. And that lasted about, the pushback for that, it was within about
Massive.
6 months that they then reverted back and then brought back Coke Classic. And literally, Coke drinkers then had a choice of New Coke or Classic Coke. And finally, I think it was later on in the 90s, early 90s, I think, that New Coke finally phased out. But Coke Classic won because it wasn't so much the taste test. And they had done all the corporate, before they released New Coke, they did blind taste tests of Old Coke and New Coke. They did their tests, and people were saying New Coke, New Coke. They liked it. But what they didn't realize was that changing Coke Classic and the taste of Coke adhered to a more diehard brand.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Loyalty that the execs at Coke were not aware of.
Yeah.
And that's, again, the power of brand. And so, again, always asking, is what you're doing, what you're tweaking right? How is your audience going to respond?
Yeah.
Because that was a very, I think when all said and done, they finally had to scrap, I think, 36 million in New Coke product eventually that never made it to the shelf. And that was a very costly mistake that Coke had. And now there is no New Coke, Classic Coke. It's just Coke.
Yeah.
And it's, and they're fighting the war with Pepsi on a different field. But they made a mistake thinking that rebranding part of their brand, in this case the actual product itself, would be the right solution. And it completely backfired on them.
Yeah, and I feel like with rebrands, again, going back to the strategy and refocusing, is like having that reason why, because when you do rebrand, you do need to consider associations, relations to the old brand, anything like that. Because even the marketer, Seth Godin, he brought up a good point about the Coke flop in the 80s, and that was where he was like, you had a whole generation of people who grew up, their moms giving them Coke, drinking Coke throughout the day, and it was this tradition. And so by Coke ripping away this formula and going, no, this is better, then you're telling that whole generation that your mom didn't know best. This is better for you. Your mom didn't know what she was talking about. Here you go. And so you tore away something that was tradition. In
It was treading on Norman Rockwell himself, practically. Just the idea of like even the old Coke
Classic
ads with Norman Rockwell's Santa.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
that's sacred.
That's Americana.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't mess with that. But hopefully, if it's done right, and like you hit it on the head, if it's strategic, it's intentional. It's not a knee-jerk reaction, and it's well thought out, well conceived, well executed. A rebrand can be a very powerful thing, but you just have to make sure that it is, make sure your brand isn't losing its soul, as you put it, and that it's done just as well done and well thought out and well launched. That's the other key thing. We've seen too many small businesses try to rebrand and it's parsed out and it's not effective. It creates confusion and it's lackluster.
So if we think of 5 red flags as to why you shouldn't rebrand, it sounds like don't do it as following the leader just because your competition is doing something. We've seen this in the fashion industry in the last 5 years of Burberry and all these brands. What they are calling blanding is that they're becoming just sans serif type. Number 2, don't do it out of reaction because your sales are slumping or there's some type of market shift, like you're doing something reactionary and not responsive. Number 3, if you're not ready to invest. And so what do you think for
the financial cost of
the financial cost of
and are you ready to
not
dump
considering
thousands of old material, old collateral you've had laying around for the sake of the rebrand?
Get ready to eat the whole thing. Number 4, I would say like being sure that you have a why behind it, and if you're doing this and you don't really know why, it's different than doing it for competitive reasons or reactionary. But if you can really write down and go, okay, no, this is for this reason, then I think you got some ground to stand on. But if you can't do that, I think that's a huge red flag, and you need to have some soul searching. 5th one, what do you think?
I'm going to say, you know what? So much of the business owner, I think, and this is it's totally human, but it comes to mind when designing a brand for a client. So much of the client's they feel like they want their impact, their thumbprint, their some of their DNA in that logo, right? And so I always use this classic example of like throwing out where it's like, oh, we got this client, the owner's wife, her favorite color is pink, and she's insisting that the logo brand mark be pink.
Must be. Yeah.
And you're going, okay, so what's the big deal? Okay, make it pink. But the reality is, if pink does not speak to the audience, then pink is going to fall flat on its face, and that's not the color to even suggest.
Yeah.
So many times, it's just because they're bored. A business owner could be bored with their brand. They've had it for 5 years. Feels stale.
Yeah.
Or they're trying to do it like, oh, well, we want to get our employees re-engaged and re-excited about the brand. Well, there's other ways of going about doing that. And that's how I get, again, it's like doing it for the right reasons. If you're just bored, and you're like, I've been looking at this logo for 5 years. I need something new. Well,
not a good reason.
Yeah, it's not a good reason to rebrand.
Yeah, boredom would be number 5. If you feel bored with your logo or your brand, then you're getting antsy and you're just trying to think of some busy work, and a rebrand isn't to fit that. That's not what it's for.
And on the flip side, I want to say, like, when is a time when a rebrand seems like a no-brainer?
Yeah,
and a brand that comes to mind is Starbucks. You look at if you just Google logo evolution of Starbucks, you're going to see over the years what they started with the brown logo back on Pike Street with the first coffee shop, and with the mermaid, and you're going to see it's how it's evolved, and I know for a fact that if Starbucks as a corporation just went to a green dot,
it would work.
You would go to every any grocery store that has a Starbucks inside, you'd see a green dot and Starbucks, it would make sense. Their brand has gotten so iconic that as an icon, just a white coffee cup with a green dot on it, that means Starbucks. So there's where the brand has almost evolved ahead of its actual visual presence. And so the brand, if anything, the brand is being rebranded to evolve with the audience, rather than the brand having to revolve to take the audience along with it. It's almost like the audience, you know what I mean? It has evolved to a point where that would actually be a very probably successful rebrand that makes sense to me as a consumer, because we've distilled its brand down to something.
Yeah, and I feel like Starbucks is a good example because you can see the evolution of it. You can see, I would even say that they, the brown Starbucks logo was very coffee tea house vibe that like Pete's and them have stuck with, versus Starbucks started, you could tell they were focusing and refining how you not only perceive like their brand, but also the experience of their storefront. And they were probably aiming more female focused, because that's obvious of the association with like Starbucks, and then with Target, everything like that. And they went more that way, their drink selection, while Pete's and everything stuck with a more masculine palette, more masculine vibe, more coffee, and just kind of like more textured. And that's kind of cliche for like coffee, but I think Starbucks started taking this more, it felt more clean and more put together. And now it's become so much more than just coffee. It's become, they just released more food items this last week that's expanding it, where it's becoming more almost like cafe. Like it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Because like with Starbucks, I felt like there was a decline. There was kind of a heartbeat skip for the brand of Starbucks, because I found like, particularly with COVID, and understandably so. From COVID on, and the first couple of years after that. But even in the last couple of years, I've noticed. It used to be you walk in any Starbucks and the quality, the cleanliness, everything was so on point. It was like all under the same management practically. And then I just discovered, like, you go in more often than not, and they kind of slumped. And I think they're probably having to make up with a lot of lost personnel that COVID brought about in those times, or whether they've changed in their management training or something. But I've just noticed that, again, and I only bring this up, and I'm a big Starbucks fan, but I only bring this up because, again, brand is not just visual, it's experiential. And so as a consumer going in to buy a pound of coffee, and I'm looking down and I'm seeing a floor that doesn't look like it was swept the evening before when they closed, That's a sign to me. And it was like, it's almost like it stands out to
like
me.
a
almost
negative
like,
rebrand.
because their brand used to be so consistent and so on point. So those little discrepancies are even, they're noticed even more because I have come to have such high expectations of the brand experience.
Yep.
You know, where the service I get, how I'm spoken to, everything is consistent no matter what Starbucks I stop along the way. It's always the same. And that's something that I felt has always been a strength of the brand. And when that starts to slip, even for a year or two, that can have lasting effects.
Cracks in the foundation. And then it really is, it's like the perception, and this goes into rebrands, because like, okay, your perception of Starbucks, that you expect a clean environment, friendly employees, stuff like that. But once, like you said, the expectation is missed, then that starts adding cracks to it. And so it is almost like this negative force that starts going, it starts changing the meaning of Starbucks in your mind. You're like, I don't want to stop there. Like, the thing was a mess last time. Unlike a positive rebrand is that you're taking that perception and you're trying to add good things to it. Either that's improving what's already great. So, okay, now it's going to be even cleaner, or the employees are going to be even more friendly. They'll remember everyone's names or whatever it could be. You're adding to that positive perception, and you're adding to that, and that's focusing and refining that versus letting it slip. And then you're starting to actually decay as a brand.
Yeah. And I think that brings up two to mind for me. You know, again, when do you, when is a rebrand appropriate, right? And again, we've touched on, well, just because something's broken doesn't mean that the right fix is a rebrand. But if you have a brand that is limping along, that has had a number, let's say your mom, you're rebranding, you've had some down years, you've lost traction with your consumers, you've had issues come up that you've lost ground with your audience, right? Is a visual rebrand, appropriate fix? No, because there's something else broken. But I think that as a brand, if they have gone and are making up for lost traction with an audience, and they've fixed a lot of things. No, let's say it's a restaurant. Okay, we'll get off the track of national. Let's talk smaller. So you've got a restaurant, and they've always been known for good food, but their service is terrible. Well, let's say they've got a completely new manager. And they've changed some things up. Everything is new, and they're trying to get people come back. So then a facelift to the brand might be in order, because with a rebrand, you do get, from the consumer side, it's almost like a proclamation. There's something new about us.
Yeah,
we're different than we used to be. So if your product or your service, your meat and potatoes of what you bring to the marketplace, and how you do that, if there's something new and fresh about that is a plus side, and you're trying to win back lost audience or get traction against a negative brand impression that people have of you, that's when you're going to see a company do that.
Yeah. It's like a guy dating a girl. And if he's a slob and she has this horrible impression of him, they go on a date maybe once and he's just a slob and a pig. And then he gets his life together a couple years later and comes and shows her, and he's all dressed up and clean cut and proper.
He's got a new profile pic. He's looking sharp and dressed
it's all
nice.
Much better. To her, she's gonna go, oh, something's different, and it's not just him going, no, I swear I'm different. I swear I've changed. But he's actually showing that, right? And like you said, when the brand can show that visually, visual intake is a huge thing for humans. So if a business can show that and show, hey, we're actually, check out our new logo, nice, clean, and it looks great. Our materials are all nice and awesome. Our storefront is clean.
There's clarity.
Someone's gonna go, okay, like this girl, I'll give you another chance, right? And you're proving that, you're showing that, and that is you're trying to create that trust where someone's going, okay, they mean what they're doing and they mean business, and they're proving that to me, and they're lending that out to you. So I think it's the visual aspect of it is huge for kind of if you do have a decaying brand that's limping along, then you can revamp things and prove people, hey, under new ownership.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much. we've touched on a lot of topics, and I know rebranding will come back up. We'll circle back around in the conversation, but I think for now, we've chatted enough about the pros and cons of the two sides of whether to rebrand or not, unfortunately, there's no set rules, set criteria for you to decide, okay, under these circumstances you rebrand, under these you don't. Only you will be able to decide, but you have to ask yourself the right questions and strategically, and figure out what to do when you're looking at trying to bring freshness to your product or service.
Yeah, I think we'll probably circle around on things, but I think overall, until next time, cheers.